I still remember the way the police officer smiled, but his eyes never did. That night was heavy. The air was thick, like even the streetlights were tired of shining. I was standing under one of those lights, its buzzing sound louder than the silence of the street. Then came the car, the red and blue lights painting the night like a warning I couldn't ignore. 2 officers stepped out, boots hitting the ground like they already owned it. They didn't ask me who I was. They didn't ask what I was doing. They looked at me, and I could see it in their faces. They thought they already knew my story. To them, I was not a person. I was a problem, and problems don't need respect. Only control. One of them smirked. He leaned forward, and I could smell the mix of coffee and arrogance on his breath. "You think you're tough out here?" he said, his voice sharp like a blade cutting into the night. I stayed silent, because sometimes silence is the loudest answer, but silence, to men like that, only feels like disrespect. Before I could even blink, my arms were twisted behind me, cold steel pressed against my wrists, the cuffs locked with a cruel snap. The streetlight kept buzzing, the world kept watching, but nobody stepped in, because in that moment, I wasn't a neighbor. I wasn't a woman. I was just another target. They pushed me toward the car, not gently, but like they wanted me to remember the pain. I could hear their laughter, echoing off the quiet houses around us. Curtains moved in the windows, neighbors peeked out, but none of them opened their doors. Not one of them said, "Hey, what's happening here?" Fear makes people quiet, and comfort makes them blind. At the station, the humiliation grew worse. They didn't ask my name. They didn't care about my ID. All they saw was skin and silence, and that was enough for their cruelty to grow bold. One of them pulled out a pair of clippers, held them up to the light, and grinned like it was some kind of game. "You think you're somebody?" he said. "Let's see how you look without that pride." And just like that, buzzing filled my ears again. But this time, it wasn't the streetlight. It was the clippers. Each lock of my hair fell to the ground. Soft pieces of me scattered on the dirty floor. They laughed as they shaved it all off, every strand, every trace of control they thought I had. I sat there, trapped, staring at the reflection in the cold metal door. A woman with bare skin on her head. A woman they thought they had broken. But inside, I wasn't broken. I was boiling, because they didn't know who I was, and they didn't care. And ignorance, mixed with arrogance, is the most dangerous fire of all. They mocked me, told me to learn my place, told me I'd remember this night forever. And they were right. I would remember it, but not for the reasons they thought, because this night, this cruelty, this insult, was the beginning of their end. They thought I was just another woman in their way. They thought I was powerless, voiceless, invisible. But little did they know, the woman they tried to humiliate was not just a woman. She was a warrior. She was a leader. She was a general. And when the truth comes out, when masks are ripped away, who will really be humiliated? Them or me? The night after they shaved my head, I sat in silence, my skin still burning where the clippers had dragged across my scalp. The mirror showed a stranger, but inside I knew exactly who I was, and the truth was waiting to break out. The world outside kept moving like nothing happened. Neighbors watered their lawns, children rode bikes, dogs barked at fences. Everything looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. Once people smell weakness, they circle like vultures. And in my quiet little suburb, weakness was entertainment. The HOA president walked past my house the next morning. Her smile stretched thin like plastic, her eyes sharp and curious. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The look told me everything. She was enjoying this. My downfall was another story for her morning gossip. The cops had taken my hair, but they hadn't taken my strength. They hadn't taken my years of battle. They hadn't taken the fire in me. Still, they strutted around the neighborhood like they had won something, like their little act of cruelty gave them power. I knew power, real power. I had commanded soldiers in the middle of chaos. I had led men and women through deserts. through jungles, through places where silence could kill. And here in this quiet street, I was about to face a war of a different kind. They thought they had stripped me down to nothing, but all they had done was strip away their own masks. I saw them for who they really were. Cowards hiding behind badges, desperate to make someone smaller so they could feel taller. But cowards always forget one thing. The smaller you think someone is, the bigger the shadow they cast when they rise. And I was already rising. My hair would grow back. My pride would not need to, and my silence would soon become the loudest sound they had ever heard. As I watched the HOA, President glanced back at my porch with that smug look. One thought burned inside me. What will they do when the woman they mocked steps back into the light? Not as a victim, but as the general they never saw coming. The knock on my door came before sunrise. Sharp, impatient, not the knock of a neighbor, but the knock of someone who wanted to remind me of their power. I opened it slowly, and there they were, the same two officers from that night, their smirks already waiting for me. One of them held a clipboard. The other tapped his hand on his belt like he was itching for trouble. They told me I was in violation of neighborhood codes. Something about my lawn. Something about my fence. Nonsense wrapped in official language. But I knew what it was. Intimidation. They didn't just want to cut my hair. They wanted to cut me down piece by piece. First dignity, then property, then peace of mind. It was psychological warfare, the kind I had seen on battlefields. Except here it was dressed in suburban politeness. I let them talk, let them wave their papers, let them threaten fines and legal action. But my silence was not weakness anymore. It was calculation. I watched their eyes. I memorized their smirks, because every soldier knows you study your enemy before you strike. When they left, I stood on my porch, looking at the papers they shoved into my hand. Bold letters screaming violation, bold lies pretending to be justice. I could feel my neighbors watching from behind curtains again, their silence louder than the police. The HOA president walked by just minutes later, as if she had been waiting, her heels clicking on the sidewalk, her perfume trailing like smoke. She looked at the papers in my hand and smiled that cold smile, the kind that said she was part of it, maybe even the one who had called them. In that moment, I realized this was bigger than two arrogant cops. This was a web, a game played by people who fed on control. The HOA, the police, the quiet whispers of neighbors who enjoyed a scandal. They all thought they had found their victim, but I had played bigger games than this, and I had never lost. I started keeping notes, documenting everything, times, dates, faces, words. I kept photos. I kept recordings, every small act of cruelty, every smirk, every false violation, because truth is a weapon, and I was sharpening mine with patience. Days passed, and their games grew bolder. The HOA sent me letters about the color of my mailbox. The cops circled my house at night, shining lights into my windows. They wanted me broken, desperate, begging for mercy. But each act only carved my resolve deeper. One evening I sat on my porch, the sun setting in streaks of red and gold, when a neighbor, an old man with shaky hands, walked over. He looked at me with eyes full of quiet guilt, and he whispered, "They think they can scare you, but they don't know who you are, do they?" I looked at him, the weight of his words pressing into me, and I realized something, the secret of who I really was. My rank, my history, my medals. It was still hidden, and that gave me power. They thought they knew me, but they didn't. Not yet. The old man leaned closer and said, "When the truth comes out, it will burn them all." Then he shuffled away, his voice still echoing in my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, replaying every moment, every humiliation, every laugh. And my heart beat steady, not with fear, but with strategy. They had declared war on me, but I was the one who had written the book on war. The question wasn't whether I would fight back. The question was how and when, because when the time came, I wouldn't just protect myself. I would expose them. stripped them bare the way they had tried to strip me. Only this time the whole world would see. And as the moonlight fell across the paper stacked on my table, I asked myself, and I ask you now, I woke up to the sound of engines outside my house. Heavy, slow, like they wanted me to know they were there. I pulled back the curtain and saw 2 patrol cars parked across the street, their lights off, their shadows long under the early morning sun. They weren't there to protect, they were there to watch, to remind me that no matter what I did, they were circling, waiting. The HOA president appeared minutes later, walking her little dog, her chin high, her steps sharp. She didn't even look at me this time. She only looked at the police cars and smiled, like she was proud of what she had created. The message was clear. They had joined hands. Cops with badges, HOA with rules, neighbors with silence, and me, alone in the middle. But what they didn't know was that alone is how I had always fought best. I made coffee, sat at my table, and spread out the stack of letters, fines, warnings, all lined up like a collection of insults, each one stamped with official seals, but each one as empty as the people who wrote them. I read them slowly, not because I cared about the rules, but because I wanted to memorize their mistakes. And oh, there were so many dates that didn't match, rules twisted to fit their anger, signatures missing, the arrogance of people who thought no one would ever question them. I smiled for the first time in days, because every mistake they made was a weapon for me, and I was gathering an army of truth. But even as I planned, they pushed harder. That afternoon the cops came to my door again, knocking loud enough for the whole street to hear. I opened, calm, steady. They handed me another paper, this time claiming I had resisted arrest, claiming I had shouted, threatened. Lies printed in black ink. They expected me to argue, to shout, to give them more fuel. But I only nodded, took the paper, and closed the door, my silence louder than any words. Inside, my hands shook, not from fear, but from restraint, because the soldier in me wanted to fight back right then, wanted to tear through their games and show them who I was. But patience was power, and timing was everything. That night, I sat on the porch again, the air thick with summer heat, crickets singing in the grass, when I noticed a different car slow down in front of my house. It wasn't police. It wasn't a neighbor. It was sleek, dark, official, the kind of car that doesn't belong on a quiet street. The window rolled down, and a man in a suit stared at me, his eyes scanning, sharp, not curious like the neighbors, but knowing, like he had already guessed the truth about me. He didn't say a word. He just nodded once, then drove away. That nod stayed in my mind all night. Was he an ally? Was he a threat? Or was he simply someone who knew that the game was about to end? The next morning, I wore something I hadn't touched in months. My old training jacket, faded but proud, the insignia still stitched on the sleeve. I walked out to get the mail, and for the first time, the neighborhood froze. Conversations stopped, curtains shifted. Even the HOA president's dog stopped barking. They didn't know the whole story yet, but they felt it. Something in the way I carried myself. Something in the way my silence had turned to steel. The officers drove by slowly, their faces pale, their smirks weaker. One of them looked like he wanted to say something, but swallowed the words. Because deep down, they knew they had gone too far. And the higher you climb on arrogance, the harder you fall when truth hits. I took the stack of letters, looked at the fine for my mailbox, for my grass, for my fence, and laughed quietly, because soon all these pieces would fit together into a picture they could never escape from. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. The war they thought they had started for fun was about to turn into a lesson they would never forget, and I would be the teacher. The question now was not if justice would come, but how loud it would be when it arrived. The sun was just starting to rise when I decided I couldn't stay quiet any longer. Silence had been my shield, but now it was time to let my silence become a weapon. I stepped outside with my training jacket again, the insignia catching the light, and I walked straight to the HOA office, the little brick building at the end of the cul-de-sac, the place where power lived in paper form. Inside, the president sat behind her desk, her smile ready like a dagger hidden behind glass. She looked at me, tilted her head, and said, "Back again? Another fine, maybe?" Her voice sweet but sharp. I didn't answer her with words. I answered her by dropping a thick folder on the desk. Every letter, every violation, every false claim stacked neatly. Evidence lined up like soldiers ready for inspection. Her smile faltered for the first time. She shuffled the papers, pretending to be in control. But her hands betrayed her. They shook. She muttered something about rules, about order, about just doing her job. I leaned closer, my voice calm but heavy, and I said, "Order without justice is not order. It's corruption." She froze, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. And for a moment, I saw it. The truth she had been hiding, the fear of being exposed. Because deep down she knew I wasn't like the others she had bullied. When I left that office, the air outside felt different. Neighbors were watching again, but now they whispered with caution, their curiosity louder than their fear. They saw the way I walked. They saw the jacket. And though they didn't know the full story, they felt the weight of it. The cops must have felt it too, because later that day, both of them returned, this time without smirks, their tone sharper, angrier. They accused me of harassment. They said I had threatened the HOA president, their voices loud, hoping the neighbors would hear. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I only said one thing, steady and clear. Every word you say is being documented. Every lie you print will be read out loud, not by me, but by a judge. The silence that followed was heavier than their threats. They stared at me, eyes narrowing, then turned and left, but I could feel their unease, their confidence cracking like glass under pressure. That night, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were medals, ribbons, photographs, faces of men and women who had trusted me, who had followed me, who had fought beside me. The weight of honor and sacrifice wrapped in silver and gold. I held one medal in my hand, my reflection in the polished surface, and I thought, they shaved my head thinking they took my pride, but my pride was never in my hair. It was in this, in what I earned, in what no one could take away. Memories flooded back, the desert heat, the sound of helicopters, the crack of gunfire, the voices of soldiers calling me, "Ma'am," trusting me with their lives. I had faced worse than these petty games. I had survived storms of war, and now I was ready to bring a storm to this quiet street. The next morning, I walked to my porch wearing that medal around my neck, the sun catching it so bright it almost blinded. The neighborhood stopped breathing. Whispers rippled, curtains opened wider. Even the children stopped their bikes to stare. The HOA president drove by, her mouth opening, closing, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. The officers parked at the corner, watching, their faces pale, the smirks completely gone now. It was only a glimpse of who I was, but it was enough to shake them, enough to turn the air thick with unease. Still, I didn't reveal everything. Not yet, because a soldier knows. Timing wins battles, and the perfect strike comes when the enemy thinks they're safe. At night, sitting with the medal still on the table, I asked myself the question that burned inside me. How much longer should I wait before I bring everything out? Before I step into the light, not just as a neighbor or a victim, but as a general who had fought for a country that now watched silently as two cops and an HOA tried to tear me down. The morning came with a chill in the air, the kind that seeps into your bones and whispers that change is coming. I stepped outside, medal still around my neck, jacket on my shoulders, and the neighborhood went quiet again. Silence is louder than words sometimes, and this silence told me everything. The HOA president didn't drive by this time. The cops didn't linger at the corner, but I could feel their eyes somewhere, watching, waiting for me to slip. They wanted me to crack. to react in anger, to prove them right. But I knew better. I had fought battles where patience meant survival, where one wrong move cost lives, and I wasn't going to give them what they wanted. Later that day, a letter arrived. Not a fine, not a warning, but a summons. I unfolded the paper slowly, reading the words that pulled me straight into the heart of their game. They wanted me in court. They wanted to put me on display, humiliate me under the law. For a moment, I just stood there, the paper trembling in my hand, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to happen. I sat down at my table, spread the letter beside the metal, and thought of all the faces I had led, all the promises I had made to never back down. And I knew. This wasn't their stage. This was mine. If they thought dragging me into a courtroom would silence me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. When the day came, I walked into that courthouse alone. No family, no neighbors, no allies. But I didn't need them. I had something stronger, the truth, my record, and the kind of discipline you can't fake. The officers were already there, their uniforms sharp, their arrogance polished. The HOA president sat beside them, whispering, pointing, smiling again like she had already won. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes forward, every step measured, every breath steady, as if I was walking onto a battlefield, not into a courtroom. People turned to watch me, not because they knew me, but because they felt something in the way I carried myself, something they couldn't name but couldn't ignore either. The judge entered, an older man with sharp eyes, the kind that miss nothing. He looked at the officers, at the president, then finally at me, his brow furrowed for the briefest moment, like he recognized something. But he said nothing. The hearing began. The officers spoke first, their voices dripping with authority, claiming I had harassed, threatened, disrespected them, painting me as the villain, their words echoing in the room. The HOA president added her part, pretending to be the victim, saying she feared for her safety, that I had made her life unbearable, crocodile tears falling at just the right moment. I listened in silence, not interrupting, not reacting, my hands folded, my face calm. But inside, I was cataloging every lie, every twisted fact, every false word they threw like bullets. And then, it was my turn. I rose slowly, the metal around my neck catching the light. The room shifted, eyes widening, whispers rippling like a storm building. I could feel their stares burning. I spoke in a voice steady, calm, but carrying a weight none of them could match. I told the judge about the false violations, the harassment, the threats, how the officers had shaved my head in humiliation, not duty. I laid down the stack of documents, letters, records, every piece of evidence in order, each one a strike against their lies. The judge leaned forward, flipping through the papers, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing at the officers, at the president. But I wasn't finished, not yet. I reached into my jacket, pulled out one more document, sealed and official, the kind that can't be denied, my service record. I placed it on the table, opened it so the words and the rank could be seen. The silence that followed was unlike any silence before, heavy, breathless, unshakable. The judge looked at it, then back at me, his eyes sharp but softer now, respectful. The room gasped, neighbors, reporters, strangers leaning forward, finally seeing not just a woman, not just a neighbor, but a soldier, a leader, a general who had faced more than any of them could imagine. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their confidence crumbling, sweat gathering at their temples. The HOA president's face drained of color, her fake tears gone, replaced by real fear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I only said one thing, steady and sure. I fought for this country. I bled for this country. I commanded soldiers who gave everything, and now you stand here, in the safety they died to protect, and tried to strip me of dignity with lies and power games. Tell me, Judge, is this the justice they fought for? The words hung in the air, unshakable, undeniable. A question that wasn't just for him, but for everyone listening. The judge didn't answer right away. He stared at me, then at the officers, then at the president. His silence louder than a gavel strike. And in that silence, I stood tall, my hand brushing against the metal, not for pride, but for strength. Because this fight wasn't over. Not yet. But I had turned the battlefield, and for the first time, they knew it. They felt it. The tide had shifted. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp, cutting through the tension like thunder in a storm. The sound echoed across the courtroom, and all eyes locked on him, waiting, holding their breath. But instead of speaking right away, he leaned back, fingers steepled, studying me, the officers, the HOA president, like he was weighing not just a case but something far bigger. I could feel the sweat at the back of my neck, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Every second stretched long, every heartbeat heavy. The officers shuffled in their seats, their earlier arrogance melting into unease. The HOA president clutched her folder tighter, her smile gone, her mask cracking. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice steady, deliberate. I have seen lies in this courtroom. I have seen people twist rules, abuse power, and expect the law to protect them, he said, eyes shifting toward the officers. But what I see here today is not justice. It is something darker. The room went still. You could almost hear the walls breathing. He picked up my service record again, reading aloud the honors, the medals, the years of leadership in combat zones, his tone sharpening with each line. The gasps from the gallery grew louder, whispers buzzing like a hive. And then he turned to me. "General," he said, the word heavy with respect, "I should be thanking you for your service, not listening to fabricated accusations designed to strip you of dignity." The officers' faces fell, their bravado shattered. The HOA president's head dropped as if the weight of her own lies was too heavy to hold up. The judge didn't stop there. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp as a blade. "These officers," he said, pointing, "acted outside the bounds of their authority. And this HOA, represented here, has become a mockery of its purpose. Instead of protecting a community, it has turned into a tool of harassment and humiliation." The gallery erupted, some clapping, some gasping, reporters scribbling faster, neighbors looking at me with new eyes that finally saw the truth. I stood silent, still, letting the storm swirl around me, knowing I had already said enough. The judge struck the gavel again, silencing the room. "My ruling is simple," he declared. "All charges against this woman are dismissed. The record will reflect her innocence, and this court will open an investigation into the actions of these officers and this HOA board." The words hit like lightning, final, undeniable. The officers tried to protest, voices overlapping, but the judge shut them down with one hard look. The HOA president crumbled in her chair, her papers slipping to the floor. For the first time in a long time, I breathed deeply, freely, the weight lifting from my shoulders, not all of it, but enough to remind me that justice, though slow, can still find its way through the cracks. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, microphones shoved toward me, voices asking questions. "How do you feel? What will you do next? Do you forgive them?" I didn't give speeches. I didn't shout. I just looked into the cameras and said one thing: dignity is not theirs to give, and it will never be theirs to take. The crowd went silent for a beat, then cheers erupted, strangers applauding, neighbors nodding, even some officers in the back lowering their heads in respect. I walked past them all, metal gleaming in the sunlight, head high, scars visible, but strength louder than any scar could hide. Back home, the neighborhood looked different. The same houses, the same lawns, the same fences, but the air was lighter, freer. Children waved at me. Neighbors came by quietly, some apologizing for their silence, others simply offering me a handshake, a meal, a smile. I accepted none of their pity, but I took their respect, because that was something earned, not given. That night, I sat at my table, the medal resting beside a cup of tea, the silence calm now, not heavy, not watchful. I thought of the soldiers I had led, the battles I had fought, and the battle I had just survived here, in this small suburban war zone. Different weapons, different enemies, but the same truth: power will always test you, and you must always be ready to stand tall. I ran my hand over my short hair, still rough from the forced shaving, and I smiled faintly. They thought they humiliated me. They thought they stripped me, but all they did was sharpen me, remind me of who I was and always will be: a fighter, a leader, a woman who cannot be broken by lies. The HOA meeting next month will never be the same. The president may resign, the board may scatter, but the memory of what happened will linger. Every time they look at me, they will see not just a neighbor, but the one who stood up, the one who fought back, and the one who won. And as I turned off the lights, letting the house slip into quiet, I knew this chapter was over. But the story of this neighborhood was still being written, because power, pettiness, pride, they never sleep, and I would be ready, always ready.